Hey, yo! What's up? Good to be here. We're talking about the nervous system today. That's that junk that's rattling around in your cranial skull. Uh, and it's kind of one of my favorite topics. It's a beautiful topic to discuss and talk about. And I could talk about this probably for several thousand semesters. I don't know that much about it, even. And I don't think anybody really does. I have several neuroscientist friends, and they don't know anything about this dang thing. And even if you spend your whole life dedicated to trying to understand this thing, even just this thing, I mean, you'll never do it. Like trying to understand a brain with another brain. It's like using a hammer to understand another hammer. It's not ever going to result in pure understanding. And we can never understand anything. You know, I'm a cell biologist. I'll never understand cells. It's like the ocean. We're always finding new stuff in the ocean or space. There's always more to explore. You know, so be careful what we learn. You can have a psychologist like Sigmund Freud study human behavior and human psychology, how the brain functions and results in behavior from a biological perspective. You know, and you'll never quite get at the truth that way. Or you can have Carl Jung exploring psychology through a spiritual lens, and you'll never fully unravel this system and this type of behavior. From either one of those lenses, you'll never fully get at the answer and unlock the mysteries of how this crazy thing works. And now it's my job to give you a little taste of how you think. So by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of how do I think. It's a pretty wild thing to teach. And I feel humbled and blessed, privileged to be able to kind of maybe be your first little window into this. And I just want to start with a couple of videos here. And I'll just shut up. These are beautiful.
Brainbow hippocampus is a microetching depicting the rodent hippocampus, an area of the brain involved in learning and memory. This microetching can be lit in two principal ways. The first is with a single overhead lamp that demonstrates the depth of complexity of the neural structure through giving the effect of neurons appearing and disappearing depending upon the angle of the viewer, much like you might see when focusing up and down through the hippocampus using a microscope. The second method is to light the microetching with multicolored lamps, resulting in a dynamic blaze of color, wherein each neuron in the microetching takes on its own hue. This method of lighting is illustrative of the Brainbow technique, a genetic strategy developed by scientists in mice that causes each neuron to manufacture a different combination of fluorescent molecules, giving each neuron its own color. As this is a genetically random process, each mouse created using the Brainbow technique will have a hippocampus that is uniquely colored, wherein a neuron that is red in one mouse might be green in another.
Okay, we'll end that one there.
This concept is demonstrated in the
Actually, we'll watch that too. It's
all
beautiful.
of the neurons will change colors depending upon where the viewer is standing, meaning that the experience of walking around the microetching might give you a sense of what the hippocampus of 100 different mice created through the Brainbow process might look like.
Okay, so what they've done here is they've taken gold and they've etched it with the neurons mapped in a rodent brain. That's what you're looking at. And we'll watch another video here of something similar.
The neural activity responsible for things such as watching how your brain sees the world, reaching out to pet your cat? Waltzing across a dance floor. Try to focus on a single neuron as you pass, and notice that your brain is constantly changing. This is what consciousness looks like. Your self reflected.
Giant network, and then used to each bird is individual, but they fly together.
So what are we really looking at here? This is kind of the outside of the brain here, also known as the cortex. And then this would kind of be the inside, more inside of the brain. This would be the cortex here, parietal cortex. You guys know that term. This thing here is the cerebellum. This is involved in movement and coordination. That's why they're saying this is part of your brain used when you waltz. Just look at what these structures are actually made out of. They're made out of these vast arrays of cells. Like you can see one little cell there, one there, one there, one there. But they form these delicious patterns and all connect together through. And you know, you can have your own idea of where self comes from, but at least your human self is certainly seated somewhere in neurons. Maybe not all in your brain, like we discussed it. We have neurons also in our heart. But this is pretty fascinating stuff. And I didn't have no gold-etched rainbow techniques. That stuff was all non-existent when I was learning about the nervous system. So let's just get in and do a little basics here on this very first lecture. So I'm trying to pull up my notes here. Okay. All right. So how do I think? Well, let's just go over some basics of the nervous system. So we got two main components of the nervous system. And these, both that I'm highlighting here, are part of the central nervous system. So this is part of the central nervous system. This is your brain and your spinal cord. All right, and then all of this coming down, these would all be going out into the limbs, down into the legs, like so. Even these coming off into the trunk. All of this would be your peripheral nervous system. Peripheral, meaning around the outside. Peripheral nervous system. So there's kind of two main components the way we split it up. We got our central nervous system, brain and our spinal cord, and we've got our peripheral nervous system. And your spinal cord is actually really, it's almost like a mini brain in and of itself. So it has an input and an output kind of side to it. We'll talk more about that. And our central nervous system, so our spinal cord, let's just put it this way, does processing of its own. So it's a processor. It's not just a transmission station. And our central nervous system not only contains neurons and things like that, but it also does things like make hormones, right? So it's not just a nerve center, it's also a hormone center. One of these hormones would be, let's say oxytocin, which is a love and bonding hormone. A hormone is a signaling molecule that our body sends to other cells. It's a love and bonding hormone. It's also involved in lactation, producing milk for our babies. Okay. And our peripheral nervous system sends and receives signals from the central nervous system. So we've seen some of this stuff. So we have sensory neurons, but then we also have things like motor neurons. Sensory neurons are how we like feel pain and temperature and absorb sounds and sights and things like that. A motor neuron would then be something that controls a muscle. So sensory neurons send signals to the CNS. Motor neurons send signals to muscles from the CNS. Signals from the CNS. Neurons. All right. Beautiful. Okay. And let's just do a little kind of touch back, call back to our heart. If you remember, our heart contained about 40,000 neurons. That's how many neurons our heart contained. Your nervous system, apart from that, contains your nervous system is made up of about 100 billion neurons, which is pretty crazy. How many? So I'm going to do the math on that real quick. I'm not done the math on this. Let's go with 100 billion. That's 100 million. 100 billion divided by 40,000. So it'd take 2.5 million hearts, neurons, and 2.5 million hearts to make up the neurons in one human nervous system. Pretty crazy. Okay? Okay. What is a neuron? That's what we're talking about here. Neurons. We've talked a little bit about these, but let's do just a quick overview of the anatomy of neurons. And then we're going to really dive into what these things are. Okay, so here we've got, this is our nucleus, of course. This part here. It's our nucleus. And our nucleus contains DNA. And DNA contains instructions to code for proteins. You guys remember all this. This part here is called the cell body of a neuron. This part down here, all of this, as well as this, it's called the axon. Axon. Boom, boom. That's the axon. And these little parts are called dendrites. All right? And not all neurons look like this. I've drawn a couple different styles of neurons for you guys, I think. We're going to draw a few here. They can take on different shapes. And we saw some of those different style shapes in those little videos I saw at the top. But for example, here in our spinal cord, you could have the cell body of a neuron, and then the axon can go all the way down to the toes. So the axon, or the length of a cell like this, of a neural cell, a neuron, can be up to 1 meter. So these axons can be, it's pretty crazy, that's pretty nuts. Up to 1 meter in length. It's wild. It's freaking crazy. All right. Maybe I should do it like this actually. Much better. Okay, they can be up to 1 meter in length. All right. And they receive signals here. So the dendrites receive signals from other neurons. receive signals. And then these axons send signals. Okay? And then in the next video, we are going to talk about that process of signal transmission. How does your nervous system communicate? How do these neurons send signals between each other? How exactly does that work? It's pretty cool. I'm excited to talk about it. All right, I will see you guys in that video. Later.